Hello and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to business confidence. Do you know what you want? What you really, really want? It's not just a Spice Girls song. It's also a very basic question that some of us, including many entrepreneurs, find very, very difficult to answer sometimes. My guest this week, Del Lewis, who's a Venturepreneur, author and speaker, found his own way by answering this key question for himself, and now he's dedicated his life to helping others to do the same. Now, Del's had an incredible career. He's been a pioneer in the maritime industry and investment banking, and he started young as an entrepreneur as well. But it hasn't been without major obstacles along the way, including one big wake-up call, something he calls his piano falling on his head moment, which led him to discover what he himself really, really wanted. So Del, for those who don't know you, just tell us what you do, key moments in your life and career that have shaped you and how they've sort of given you encouragement and confidence to prosper.
That's a great first question. How long is this podcast? So I am currently, I've started a company a little over 20 years ago, which I'm still running today. And it's what I refer to as a venturepreneurial firm. And as a venturepreneur, it's probably a term that your audience has not heard of before, and that's not uncommon because it's a term that I created. But I think it accurately describes what I do, because what I do is a combination in my mind between venture capitalism and entrepreneurship. And in a sense, my company, Triclair Business Holdings, invests in and partners with entrepreneurs. And that is sort of the venture capital side. I typically do not invest capital, though, which is a little bit different. I typically invest my entrepreneurial experience and expertise. And then the entrepreneurial side is I work alongside with them. Unlike a venture capitalist tends to give you money and then they tell you what you should do. I try to work alongside the entrepreneur and his or her team to help them build their business and go farther faster.
Well, it sounds like a really good sort of model. But let's take a step back. How did you get here? What led you on this path?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about business and life, I think, in general, is that every step seems to lead you in a particular direction. And so over my career, I've known since I've been a young adult that I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started my first business when I was about 21, 22, and I bought my first business when I was 24. Wow. And I actually financed that with a version of junk bonds. It was not a whole lot of money, but I actually created these bonds and financed the business to buy it. So I've always been an entrepreneur. And over the course of my journey, I've had several sort of iterations. I've started businesses. I've worked for organizations that have been involved in business and investing. And I was took a job, had a great opportunity and took a job for an investment banking firm on Wall Street. And that's where I really started to learn about the money side or the investment side of business. And I've always been, since my young career, an advocate and an appreciator of Warren Buffett and what he does and how he does. And then usually when I say that, people say, well, of course you are, because he's a multi-billionaire. It's like, well, that's not the reason why. The reason why is the way he looks at a business and the way that he values a business and the types of businesses that he wants to invest in. And so the long story short is I created Triclair so that I could invest in privately held businesses, because Buffett typically invests in publicly held businesses. I wanted to invest in smaller privately held businesses, but I wanted to do it sort of in the Warren Buffett way. And I use the term Buffettology because that's kind of what I do and the way that I do it. Right.
So that's a bit about your background. But you say you've kind of always been an entrepreneur, so you've had this sort of track record. But there's a certain image of entrepreneurs, swashbuckling, sort of risk taking, and so on. Do you fit into that, or are you different? Because I would say that perhaps entrepreneurs are as many different types as there are entrepreneurs, in terms of personality.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And so, in one of my definitions, I have sort of several definitions of entrepreneurs, because like you say, we come in all different shapes and sizes. But one of my macro definitions of an entrepreneur is someone that sees an opportunity to add value and then creates a a financial enterprise around that.
Hmm.
That to me, and you can be as conservative as the day is long, see an opportunity and start your business, and you can be as risky and wild as the day is long and see an opportunity and start your business.
Yeah.
So that's a great observation. You're absolutely right. They're becoming all shapes and sizes.
Okay. Just take me through a little bit of the journey. I mean, I'm thinking more in terms of, sort of lessons that you learned, maybe where things perhaps you maybe took a wrong turn or didn't get something quite right. Because, I mean, these days you're advising a lot of entrepreneurs and so on, but the advisor sometimes, needs to learn things themselves along the way in order to be sort of wise about all these things. So tell us about a few of yours.
As you ask me this question now, I think this really gets to the core of what I believe your wonderful podcast is really all about. And so I'll mention it from a macro standpoint, and I'll be able to, hopefully I'll give you some specific examples along the way. But I think for me, to answer your question about those turns and those twists, they came when I didn't have a clear understanding of what it was that I really wanted. And in all of my coaching and in my investing and in my partnerships, if you ask any of my partners, anybody that I've dealt with, what's the one question that Del asks you all the time? It's some form of, what do you want? And it's amazing. You would think that off the cuff, we would be able to say exactly what we want in an instant. But for, I think, human beings, it's one of those things that's very hard for us to articulate. And it's so important to understand. So in kind of a macro sense, I used to think in my teens and early 20s that I would do anything that was legal, ethical, and moral for money.
Right.
Okay. To create money and to create wealth. And fairly early on in my early 20s, I realized that through, I mentioned I bought my first business when I was 24. It was actually a restaurant that I bought. My brother and I bought a restaurant, and we started that. And he was a chef, and he ran the back of the house and I ran the front of the house. He loved what he was doing. I ultimately hated what I was doing. And it was then that, it hit me, right? And I say we all get wake-up calls, right? And some of us get a wake-up call by a tap on the shoulder. Others of us get wake-up calls by grand pianos falling on our heads.
Yeah.
Right? This was more the latter for me, because I was like, oh my gosh, I do not want to do this, right? And then I said, so I need to change, right? I need to change my outlook, because I will not do anything that's legal, ethical, and moral for money. I need to figure out what I want. And when I figured that out, it's amazing how the stars aligned, the universe came together, and things really started to work, and I got into flow.
Yeah. I mean, was there a particular moment then when the piano fell on your head, or was it, I mean, not literally, but I mean, was it that it wasn't going very well, or you just thought you had a bad day or a bad week or month? Or
Yeah. So I actually think I talk about this in my book, but I was in the restaurant, and it was about 3:00 in the morning. It was only myself and my head bartender that were in the restaurant. And he poured me another drink and then proceeded to berate me for the next 45 minutes about how I was a terrible owner, terrible operator, didn't know what I was doing. The restaurant was going downhill, blah, 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 blah. And, I'm looking around, I'm thinking, I own this restaurant and he's my employee. And I'm sitting here at the bar being berated by him. I said, something is wrong with this equation. And that was really the piano. That's when it fell on my head. I came back about 2 hours later, early in the morning. I came back, put a sign on the door that said we're temporarily closed. And we actually never opened again.
Right. Right. And did you feel a kind of weight lift off your shoulders? At least you weren't doing something you hated doing, or other people felt you weren't so good at doing, and so on. I mean, did you have at that point a clear idea of what it was that you did want, or you just had relieved yourself of what you didn't want at that point?
Yeah, no, I had a very clear idea. And I realized that I wanted to go back into what now became very clear to me was one of my passions, right? So again, this part of your first question to me, my background is I'm a marine engineer. So I have a degree in marine engineering. I went to one of the 5 federal academies here in the United States, and that'll probably mean nothing to your international viewers, but it might mean something to your American viewers. I went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And then I sailed on ships for a number of years when I graduated. And I loved the sea. I loved the maritime industry. And I said, you know what? I want to get back in to the maritime industry.
Right.
So I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And just further to your question, it was a huge weight off of my shoulders, right? The fact that I had made that decision to go in a direction that I wanted to go in was a huge lift off my shoulders. And it's funny when I say that even now, because I had all sorts of problems. That very second that I put the sign on the door, I had a ton of problems, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had employees that I needed to pay and wrap up payroll. I had taxes that were due. I had to figure out how to close the restaurant. I had to figure out how to tell my brother what we were doing, tell my investors what we were doing. I had a ton of problems, but I felt liberated, right? Because I had made that decision. I was going in the direction of something that I wanted to do.
Okay. So one question maybe for our listeners might be that, one of our listeners may be looking at a situation where they know they're not happy in what they're doing, where either they are not entrepreneurs at the moment, but they're thinking about it, or they have started up, but things aren't going quite right. I mean, should they, it's difficult to generalize in your answer, I know, but if you make that weightlifting decision without knowing what you want, I mean, is that a good thing? Because in one way, they might be thinking, well, I don't really want to sort of give up this job or things like that until I know what I want to do. On the other hand, the sheer weight of pressure of their misery and all the other burdens might actually stop them seeing something with clarity. I mean, should they maybe be a bit brave and sort of, I hesitate to generalize about our listeners, but did you find clarity because you had suddenly got this thought about, I don't want to do this anymore? I mean, or did you carry the burden for a while, knowing that you wanted to do it, but maybe not being brave enough until the bartender said his piece?
Yeah. And I don't know if I've ever truly sort of thought about it. So now as I think about it and I hear the question, if I look back, I think the clarity of what I wanted became a lot stronger once I made the decision to get rid of doing what I wasn't liking to do, right? So as I think about it, that would be my macro suggestion to anybody, is that you've got to get yourself in a place where you can at least think about or feel good enough about thinking about what you want, even if you don't know what you want, because it's going to come to you a lot clearer and a lot sooner.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I mean,
that's a great observation.
Thank you. You just made me think about a situation where I started working in a PR agency so many years ago, and we had one client who was making everybody miserable, and just by being incredibly demanding and just not very nice as a client. We took a decision to sack the client. The client would have become a big burden on the business, although they were worth a lot of money. And what happened was immediately the opposite to what we expected to happen. Yes, okay, we took a hit, but within 3 weeks, we'd found 3 other clients and worth more money than the client, all of whom were extremely nice and very reasonable. But people have forgotten what it was like. Because of the burden they'd been feeling, they didn't realize there was another way, to move on. But I mean, we pick a theme each week in terms of sort of giving entrepreneurs confidence. And I've done a little bit of work with you on the sort of content side of things. And what I know of you, I sort of see a confident, happy, sort of successful person. But in terms of once you made that decision, bye-bye restaurant, hello new world, were there other things that you were learning along the way? Moments of reckoning, learning, breakthrough moments in your mind? I'm just interested in those moments where you suddenly pennies dropped and you thought, aha, this is the way.
Yeah. For me, and I don't know when I first picked up the book Think and Grow Rich. I'm sure it was way before I bought my first business, probably in my teens. And, people have often said about that book that not only should you read it, but you have to read it multiple times. And I have read it multiple times over my life. But I think it was a concept that I don't think I had really fully understood before about what was in that book really started to come to life to me. And it was this idea of starting to envision and sort of feel what it was that you wanted. And I actually went so far as to create in my mind, what I wanted to, how I wanted to get into the maritime industry, right? And so I said to myself, I said, look, I want to be a business owner. I want to own a business. I want to be involved. I'd like to own and operate ships, but I want to be one of the owners, right? And I'd love to be able to do it with a small group of people where I'm considered of value. And that dream just I started to add more to it and more specificity and more clarity to it and more feeling to it. And, I'll say to you and I'll say to your listeners who might think it's, kind of way out there or magic or something, but what happened to me actually was very, very close to what I had visualized.
Right.
When it ultimately did happen.
Because you visualized it. And okay. So you start with the visualization and then you think, well, in order to do that, what has to happen? Is that what you mean? Or
well, and so here's a distinction to that I've learned much later in life, but I want to add to it now.
Okay.
It's after the visualization, it's not so much trying to figure out what you need to do, but it's being open to what presents itself. So what I did was I maintained that it really was a dream, right? I mean, it was just kind of like, it was like a story. It was fiction at that point, right? It was like, this is what Dell wants, right? And then as things would present themselves, then I would go ahead and step into them, right? So if someone would call me up and say, hey, would you like to meet so-and-so because they're a reporter for the Maritime News? And I would say, well, I can't see any connection to that, to me owning my own company, blah, blah, blah. But yes, I will go ahead and do that, right? So I would step into that, and then that would lead to the next thing, and that would lead to the next thing. So it's really, what I call it today, after several years of thinking about this and working on this, is I call it inspired action. And so it's once you have that vision, then what action do you feel inspired to take? And that to me is different than what is the right answer or what is the right how, because we can spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the right how is, and we waste a lot of time trying to figure it out versus taking inspired action all of the time. And I think we move farther, faster that way.
Right. So let's just go a little bit further on the journey then. And what happened in terms of, and then how's that led you on to sort of new entrepreneurial challenges? And are there any sort of like one or two things that you feel you've learned along the way on those, on the later part?
Yeah. So I'm obviously condensing the story to a great degree, but to let you know, part of my vision, what I wanted was I wanted a successful entrepreneur to appear into my life to say, I want to take you in as a partner. And I want to teach you, and I also want to learn from you, and I want to grow something together with you. And so I was, so you talk about inspired action. I actually took a job, a job, even though I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I took a job at a marine engineering firm because I obviously need to pay my bills. So I was sitting there at my desk, bored out of my mind, and the phone rings. And the receptionist at the time, who was transferring the call in, said, Del, there's someone on the phone asking for you. I throughout my journey and in sort of my dream and these inspired actions, this one name kept coming up, right? This name, John Morris. You might want to talk to John Morris. I don't know John Morris, but I hear John Morris, blah, blah, blah. It just kept coming up. I'm sitting at my desk one day. The secretary, the receptionist says, Del, there's a John Morris on the line for you. I pick up the phone and he says, Del. I said, yes. He says, this is John Morris. Yeah. And he proceeded to outline to me that he was a successful entrepreneur and that he wanted to get into the shipping business. And he was looking for somebody exactly like me that he could learn from, but he could also teach. Right. And it just blew my mind.
Yeah. Wow. Well, crikey. I mean, that was, did you, when you heard the call was coming through, you're thinking this can't be real?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So presumably you did learn off him, and so things went well. And
We started a shipping company together,
yeah.
along with his son, John. So it's John Jr. and John Sr. John Sr. was the one that called me that day. Unfortunately, he passed away, and a lot earlier than he should have. A terrific man, was like a second dad to me. But the three of us built a shipping company, a maritime shipping company, and it was just a phenomenal part of my life.
All right, brilliant. So did you then think, you got to that bit and thought, well, okay, I've been there, I've done that, and now I want to do something else? I mean, are you the sort of person who, do you see a sort of a shiny new thing and think, I want to go and do that? I mean, was it something like that, or could you have stayed there for forever? I mean,
yeah. So this is where youth sort of comes in. I'll just say that in general, right? So I think I was probably 27, 28 at the time that we started the company and started to build it. So I was, I wasn't even 30 yet. And that youth, that sort of youthful exuberance, right? I wanted us to conquer the world, right? I wanted us to take over the shipping world. And my partner, John Jr., who by nature, we talked about at the outset, the different types of entrepreneurs, different shapes and sizes. I was very much of a risk taker, go-getter, let's go do it, right? John Jr. was on the other end of the spectrum. He was a very good, successful entrepreneur, but very conservative and very, very low risk tolerance. And then his father was kind of in the middle. He could go both ways because he was older and he'd been around, right? And so he kind of knew how to take risks and whatnot. But long story short, I just got to the point where I won't say frustrated, too strong a word, but I just felt it wasn't going fast enough, right? And so, being 29 and thinking I could still conquer the world, right? As a lot of us 29-year-olds do think at the time, I said, okay, guys, I think I'm going to part company and I'm going to go off and do my thing and sort of conquer the world the way I wanted to do it. In hindsight, and I have no regrets, but I do think I could have stayed there longer. We could have grown steadily and kept going, but I decided to do what I did. And, I think everything happens for a reason, right? So as I said, I have no regrets, but I did, after about 5-6 years, I decided to move on and do something else. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, I know you in terms of your businesses more recently, in terms of, you mentioned Triclair sort of early on. But are there things that you're continuing to learn in the more recent past, things that you're there as somebody who's kind of advising people and helping people, CEOs, board members, and so on, but nobody stops learning. So what sorts of things have you been learning more recently?
Yeah, I mean, I love to learn. In fact, I was just talking to one of my partners the other day, and she was saying, oh, that was a great call we had, and you did something at the end of the call that I thought was so neat, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to learn. I said, one thing that I loved about you as a partner is that you have a willingness and an eagerness to learn, which I do as well. I'm learning every single day, something new and something different. And I'll just share a couple of things that I've glommed onto or learned and experiences I've had in the last couple of years. One of them is my exposure to a movement that's predominantly here in the United States, although I think we're trying to get it more worldwide, and it's called conscious capitalism. And there's a number of different offshoots of it, and there's no one right way to do it. But in my opinion, what that means is this concept of your organization creates value for some segment of the world, right? That's why you're in business. And you have all of these stakeholders that are a part of that. You've got your employees, you've got your suppliers, you have your investors, you have your community, right? You might even have the regulatory bodies. And the idea around conscious capitalism is being able to understand that all of those organizations and people are stakeholders, and understanding what they bring to the table and communicating with them in such a way that you can create greater value for your segment of the world. So that's one of the things that I've learned recently and been spending more time on. And the thing that I think flows through everything, if I had to boil it all down, it comes to communication. I think that is so critical and so key. in not just in business, but in all walks of life, right? You need to communicate well with your family, with your partner, with with your business people, your employees, your teammates. And within that communication, it's understanding that I have a side and you have a side. And they don't necessarily need to be at odds. But what we need to do is figure out, I need to understand your side, and I want you to understand my side. And it's from that communication and that understanding that we can figure out what we need to do.
If you had to say one thing to the listeners about the one thing that you learned, in the last, however many years sort of from sort of being an entrepreneur, could you boil it down?
Yes, on any given day, I might give you a different answer.
That's okay.
Today, I'm going to give you the answer that I think is most prevalent. And it goes back to what we talked about at the outset of this conversation. It's about understanding what you want.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing, because, we just talked about, two sides of a conversation, right? If I, from my side, don't really know what I want, how are you going to be able to participate successfully in that conversation, and vice versa, right? So that happens in terms of relationships, and it certainly happens in terms of business and business success. If you don't know what you want, it's that old adage, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right? And you end up going down several different roads, and you end up back where you started. And so it's really knowing what you want.
Okay, right. Okay, Del, just to finish off, what are you up to right now, apart from talking to me, obviously? I mean, tell us about any sort of particular projects that you think listeners might be interested in how can people also find out more about you?
Sure. So I'll answer the second part first. You can go to either one of my two primary websites. One is dellewis.com, and that's DEL, just one L. And then Lewis is LEWIS. So DELLEWIS.com. And the other is the business website TriClare, which is T as in Tom, RICLARE.com. So TRICLARE.com. And that you can find me there. And then if I can be so bold at the very end, I've got something I'd like to share with your listeners that I think would be tremendous, especially for the entrepreneurs and solopreneurs out there. I call it the best $7 you've ever spent. And it really gives you a roadmap and a blueprint on ways to think about doing what you're doing and to get that success perhaps a little bit faster. But what I'm doing is what I've been doing really for the last 20 years is investing in and building entrepreneurs. I'm very excited about some of the partnerships that I have. I have a partnership with a group out of Colorado where we specialize in helping entrepreneurs to build their business. We take them through a year-long program where we teach them step by step what to do. And so I'm very excited about that. So that's called the Awakened School. If you want to just Google that, you can check that out and see my partners there. But,
Okay, brilliant. Del, it's been absolutely wonderful to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being a great guest. And thank you so much, and good luck with everything that you're doing.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Trevor. As I said, you ask these wonderful, insightful questions. And you have a way about yourself that I just feel like talking to you all day long. So,
okay, thank you very much. Well, flattery will get you everywhere, Del. Del's this amazing guy. You can't help feel better for having listened to him. I love those stories of him propping up the bar in his own restaurant, being berated by the bartender, and the way he took the most of his opportunity when his Maritime mentor phoned him up. And if you don't know what you want, how can you expect other people to understand what it is that you want, as he put it so beautifully? Our thanks to Del. And if you have any questions about this podcast or want to find out about our business, you can do so by finding me, Trevor Meriden, on LinkedIn, or email me on trevor.meriden@merribournemedia.co.uk. And please do share this podcast with someone who you think may be interested. It's available on Spotify, iTunes, and many other podcast providers.